Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. I'm your host, Pat. It's my vacation. Thank you for joining me. Come enjoy it with me. I'm sipping on a briefcase porter. It's some fancy-ass beer. It's not bad. We're listening to Charles Bronson while I do so. This is their complete disco crappy on Youth Attack Records, I think. Mark McCoy, the vocalist. This was his first band, to my knowledge. Went on to be in Das Oath and a ton of other bands. Not really much of a fan of his work outside of Charles Bronson, but he runs Youth Attack Records. They put out a lot of super limited hardcore and some black metal too. You know, if you're into that stuff, you probably know who they are. Into that kind of thing. So this is a response video. Myke C Town posted up top 10 hardcore records from the 90's video, where he talked a lot about this kind of metallic hardcore that preceded all the more mainstream sounding metalcore of the 2000s. You know, there's a lot of great stuff like Overcast, and who I'm not really a fan of, but they were good. You know, Overcast, Starkweather, Integrity, that sort of thing. I picked out 10 records, kind of a different sides of the hardcore spectrum from that era, from between 1990 and 1999. I feel like a lot of mine lean either towards like the New York hardcore kind of stuff or more towards crust, but whatever. All that stuff is under the umbrella of hardcore to me. You know, it's all hardcore punk really. Although I feel like in the 90's, that's when things were most divided, where there was a lot of like friction or schism, if you want to use the Vinny Stigma term, the New York hardcore term. There was a lot of division between the emo kids and the fucking crust punks and the straight edge kids and everything, and a lot of that seems to have been mended in the 2000s for what it's worth. Anyway, to kick it off, none of these are in order. These aren't even like a true top 10. Like, I didn't sit down and, you know, really put a lot of thought and emotion into like what hit me the most. A few of these I didn't even get into until the 2000s. I didn't appreciate until then. But I wanted to pick 10 records that were LPs, records that I, you know, hadn't talked about previously or had talked about minimally at least, so I'm not double dipping too hard. And hopefully you'll get into something you haven't heard before. So let's get started. So, kicking it off with a bang, we have His Hero Is Gone's Monuments to Thieves. This is a fucking fantastic record. They had His Hero Is Gone shared members with a shit ton of bands, including Tragedy and Death Threat and a bunch more. They were based in Memphis when they put this out. I think the Burdett brothers both live in Portland, last time I checked. But how to describe this? It's both doomy and fast at the same time. There's a lot of European hardcore influence and a bit of D-beat and that sort of thing. There's some blasting, but there's also a really like foreboding, dreary sort of I don't know, sludgy is the word, but a lot of slow, heavy stuff going on with really like kind of an insidious sense of melody to it. Very much like kind of talks about the decline of the Western world and the failings of industrialization and stuff like that. It's a killer record. Incredibly foreboding and heavy as shit and catchy and short. This is a 45 RPM LP. If you want to hear a great sludge record, put it on 33. And I think it's like a half an hour long or less. They say a lot in a very, very short period of time. I also think that like the early Neurosis, probably up to about Souls at Zero, has a lot of influence on the slower parts of this. I can certainly see that, and that's been said before. But yeah, if you want a place to start with this band, I would go with this record. Tragedy's fantastic too. They really sped things up quite a bit more for Tragedy though. This came out on Prank Records in, I want to say 97 or something like that. Just repurchased this. I should have never sold it. These records are kind of up there nowadays, surprisingly. And Prank is still around, so I think those guys should repress this. So, next up we got the Devoid of Faith self-titled. Now I know I talked about this a long time ago, one of my early updates. because I had the discography CD that I bought for like $5 from one of the guys from this band, Nate Wilson, who sells great stuff on Discogs, Cryptocomics on Discogs. But I didn't really talk at length about it to my shitty memory. This is an incredible fucking hardcore LP. Kind of like His Hero Is Gone, I feel like there's that early first couple of records Neurosis influence, but there's quite a bit more going on as far as influences, as far as sounds. Gets downright noisy in parts. There's like this really squonky, loud bass that kind of, you know, is louder than guitars at certain points, so it kind of has that driving Motorhead or even Cro-Mag's demo kind of feel to it. There's certain discordant elements, and there's like a fair amount of feedback and noise, but there's also a very anthemic kind of punk underpinning to it. It's just fucking great. This came out on Crust Records, and I think because of that, and probably because of who the bands they were playing with, they got pigeonholed as kind of a crust punk band. And while I can see that's an element to their sound, and probably an influence, you know, particularly like the late 80s UK bands, like the early Peaceville stuff, Prophecy of Doom and stuff like that. I'm sure they listen to that shit. I don't think it sounds like that at all. I think it's just a really unique, noisy, dark hardcore record. When they go melodic here and there on it, it's great. The vocals are real strangled and desperate. Have a great deal of emotion to them. Devoid of Faith, self-titled, awesome. Next up, we got Voorhees, Spilling Blood Without Reason. This came out on Armed with Anger Records. This band was a British band from Yorkshire, I believe. I think they were from Bradford. Really interesting capsule in time, this record and this band. You know, it's no surprise that a lot of British people, British hardcore fans, were a big fan of the Boston stuff, big fan of Siege and Jerry's Kids and Negative Effects and stuff like that. If you listen to Heresy, the UK hardcore band, they're pretty strong evidence of that fact, as well as Ripcord and all the UK hardcore classics that picked up the torch after a bunch of the American hardcore bands fell apart in the late 80s. This is sort of a continuation of that, but it's way meaner. Very strong Boston influence. You know, usual suspects. Negative Effects, Negative Approach from Michigan. Siege. Infest a bit in there. Brutally fast. Deep shouted vocals. And I feel like there's, with all the football tops, all the football jerseys that they're wearing, there's a certain, like, almost like weird kind of hooligan element going on, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. Obviously, fans of Friday the 13th, killer fucking album art there. But this band was pretty influential in their own right. If you've ever heard Extortion from Australia, they sound a lot like these guys. It's just one step away from being almost like a power violence band, but more pure hardcore than that. There's no, like, slow parts, really big deviations between slow and fast. It's mostly like 1, 2, 3, go fast all the way through. When they do occasionally go slow, it's fucking awesome. Really hard, really great. So check that one out. This came out mid-90s sometime. I want to say, I don't know, 94, 95. Veering off into another direction. Excuse me. This is a reissue of Marauder's Master Killer on Reaper Records. This came out in 95. Man, what a fucking scary-ass record. Heavy as hell. This came out on a nice swirled pink and black there. Reaper Records put this out in 2008, I think. This was the second LP by Marauder. And it's got that New York hardcore swagger, you know, from the 90s, that Biohazard, Madball, Sick of It All had, but combined with this pummeling double bass kind of driven, heavy, sort of Slayer, sort of Bolt Thrower, sort of Obituary, kind of fucking punch in the gut approach. The riffs are fucking fantastic. Courtesy of Sob, R.I.P. Sob. Mean, nasty, street level stuff, you know, the stuff that these guys were singing about they were living. Not a positive record by any any scope of the imagination, but very, very fucking heavy. Life is Pain. I think I just spit there, sorry. Say it, don't spray it. Another great one. I'm sure people could debate me on whether or not this is considered a hardcore record. I think it's as hardcore as it gets, really. Destroy Necropolis. Came out in 93 on Sound Pollution Records. Very much that whole anarcho kind of presentation to it. I won't unfold it all the way, but you better believe this folds out into a big poster kind of thing. All the lyrics, all the descriptions of the songs. For those not in the know about Destroy, the vocalist Felix Vaughn Havoc runs Havoc Records and Distribution. Fantastic distro if you're looking to pick up some punk, cross, D-beat kind of shit. He went on to, of course, sing in Code 13 and then Damage Deposit after that. I feel like other members in this band went on to a lot of other stuff. I know one of them went on to be in Disembodied, which I just found out. I was just researching and found that out, which is pretty wild. Brain Oil was another band that one of the members went to. As far as the music, I listened to the shit out of this when I first got it, when I was getting into crust. I was into Doom and I was into Disrupt, and I like both of those bands quite a bit. But Destroy had a lot more just like hooks and catchiness. There was, in addition to that, the typical kind of 80s, you know, fast punk, fast Scandinavian punk and D-beat kind of thing, Discharge Worship going on. There was, I feel like just enough American hardcore influence in there to, and like along with early Napalm Death and of course the aforementioned late 80s crust stuff to just weave everything together. The band also had a sense of humor. You know, they were very serious about their kind of leftist political leanings, but they also, you know, it opens with a Warriors sample, with Cyrus yelling, "Can you dig it?" over and over again. Fucking great, a lot of blasting, a lot of grind kind of elements too, but just sloppy enough to make it seem punk, not to sound like shit. It's just a great, awesome record. Then, after that in the pile, I have Sheer Terror's Thanks for Nothing. Second LP, sophomore LP by these New York hardcore, long-standing sweethearts. You know, they kind of represented the underbelly of New York hardcore stuff. Again, dark, negative shit. Their first record was always kind of known for having this crazy, like, Celtic Frost Hellhammer guitar tone, and the riffs were also really Celtic Frost inspired. They kind of strayed away from it on this one and went with, I don't know, the riff style was almost kind of, I mean, New York hardcore style approach, but also with, like, these great little licks and hooks and stuff that almost reminded me of, like, Sabbath and a lot of kind of heavier 70s classic rock kind of stuff. Bellowing, angry vocals. Paul Bearer occasionally does belt it out and sing, and it's beautiful when he does. The guy, hell of a vocalist. Close My Eyes is a good example from this record of how he can actually sing very well. This was a re-recording of an album that came out before, Ugly and Proud, where they re-recorded most of the songs because they got ripped off by this Canadian distributor record label that they never got any copies, they never got any money, so they just decided to re-record the whole thing. And it says on the back, I believe this is the man they're speaking about here. Extra special thanks to Zoran Busick for being the biggest prick we've ever had the displeasure of knowing, and for helping deepen our distrust of humankind. Your actions, or lack thereof, have not gone unnoticed, you scumbag. Not pulling any punches, but yeah, miserable, angry, fucking blazing fucking New York hardcore there. Those are the LPs I pulled. So we'll start talking about some CDs here. Path of Resistance, Who Dares Wins. As I've mentioned before, I'm from Syracuse. Was a huge fan of the first two Earth Crisis 7 inches. I appreciate the LPs that came afterwards, but I never really got into them. They came out when I was not feeling anything very metal, and they got very metal at that point. And they never really got their hooks in me as a kid. I revisit them from time to time, and I enjoy them, but when many of the members of Earth Crisis, along with a few other people, came out with this bad boy, Who Dares Wins, in 96 or 97. Believe it or not, this cover art really was divisive at the time, but when they came out with this, I was blown away because it was fast. And most of that time, I was really into street punk, crust, you know, anything fast. I was getting more and more into, like, older American hardcore from the 80s. But I always appreciated that kind of injection of speed back into, like, chuggy, heavy kind of hardcore stuff, and they did it really well. So it's got kind of a youth crew kind of feel to it, but that really stompy sort of metallic kind of thing that Earth Crisis has on the first couple of records as well. But some of the best well-written straight edge lyrics that I've read ever. One of the vocalists on this, DJ Rose, old friend of mine, runs a tattoo shop that I got all my work done at. Just saw him a couple of days ago while visiting, and it's always nice to see the guy, but some of the best angry, spiteful kind of straight edge related lyrics, and clever too. I think the best one on here is everyone wants to dance with the devil, but nobody wants to pay the band. Fucking fantastic. So after Path of Resistance, I have Spaz here. Had this since it came out in whatever it was, 97. This is Crush, Kill, Destroy on Slap-a-Ham. This is their last LP, to my knowledge. This is a great record because they stripped away a lot of the kind of slower... earlier Spaz had, like, I think a stronger kind of Man is the Bastard thing going on, where it had, like, weird noodly breaks and kind of, like, almost jazzy slow parts, as well as, like, the full frontal blasting, raging power violence kind of stuff. With this, they went almost straight old-school hardcore with a little bit of power violence and a little bit of blasting, and all those funny samples that we grew to know and love from Spaz. A lot of samples from the movie Wild Style, so if you're into graffiti or graffiti culture, this is up your alley. But just, I think it's their most well-written record, incredibly catchy. Of course, the long-ass song titles like Charles Bronson has that are really funny. Black & Decker Krusty Wrecker is one of my favorites. Let me see, Campaign for Emo Destruction. Now with 90% more pants shitting, I think, is another one on here. It's hard to read. Fucking great band. They had an awesome run. I actually got to see them not long after this came out in San Francisco at the Gilman Street venue with Melt Banana, and it was one of the funnest shows I've ever been to. Spazz's set was like 15 minutes. It was all I needed. Fucking hilarious, fun shit. Actually meant to mention this in one of my Year of Our Lord videos and forgot to. Set It Off by Madball. It's definitely a big one for me from the 90s. I enjoy everything by Madball, I discovered. I was bored, it was a slow night at work, and I decided to play pretty much their entire discography via Spotify. And what an amazingly consistent band. They've kind of always had the same sound, veering off a little bit here and there. This was their debut, Set It Off, and probably my favorite by them. This was a continuation of Agnostic Front initially. You know, on this record, Vinny Stigma's credited as guitarist, and you had Will Shepler on drums, Matt Henderson, who were in the previous lineups of AF, and you know, you had Freddie singing, who was Roger from AF's younger brother. I like this because it kind of bridges that gap really nicely. On a couple of their 7-inches, they did the Ball of Destruction 7-inch. They did mostly just AF songs from the United Blood 7-inch. And on this, they reworked those. It's kind of beefier production, but they also have newer songs. And Matt Henderson is just a beast of a guitarist. He went to Berklee School of Music. He wrote all of this stuff, and he was able to boil down the most violent, hard-hitting fragments of like thrash metal riffs, kind of remove out all the fat and all the solos and everything, and just deliver it in this kind of rhythmic, chunky way that influenced everybody that plays this kind of hardcore, you know, from Terror to Hatebreed to all that stuff. Take Offense. I mean, none of those bands would sound like they do if it wasn't for Matt Henderson, and fantastic fucking guitarist. I really like his work on One Voice as well, that had more soloing and kind of a little bit more of a metal flair to it, but this record's so fucking good. And I remember when I got it, thinking like Freddie's vocals like were exactly what I needed for a hardcore vocalist to sound like, because I was so used to death metal. I needed something like almost as equally as aggressive. Fucking great. Also within that realm, Integrity, Systems Overload. This came out on Victory in 97. This is the original pressing, for what it's worth. Systems Overload's my favorite Integrity record. For a lot of people, it's Humanity's the Devil. For a lot of people, it's Those Who Fear Tomorrow. This appealed to me the most because it had this weird... Their previous influences were happening on this one as well, you know, Cro-Mags, Judge, Slayer, Metallica, that sort of thing. But this brought in a little bit more, almost like a kind of a Discharge pace to it, and almost like some Japanese hardcore too as well. And I also like the fact that it had solos on it. This is like the most unpopular year for solos in any type of music, and Incarnate 365, track 1 on this, has solos over the entire song. They also brought in songs like No One, which was, you know, a 30-second rager, kind of in the spirit of old punk and hardcore, like DRI, which I love. Mediator, they got a little bit political on songs like Armenian Persecution. Dwid's vocals, his voice box is about to jump out of his fucking throat on this. It's fucking great. I think it's his best vocal performance ever. He definitely sounds meaner, you know, and more inhuman on the newer stuff, but he's just going for it so great on this. And they, you know, they still have that sort of Slayer, Seasons of the Abyss kind of creepy riffs going on in this, but like when they go fast, it's much more almost kind of punk to me. I think that's why I like it the most. But yeah, Systems Overload. So yeah, that's my top 10 for today. Lots of good records came out in the 90s, so just what I was feeling at this particular moment. So that's all. We'll see what's going on with videos and stuff. I imagine I'll record more when I'm on vacation. Got some stuff I want to talk about. So, I don't know, tomorrow's my birthday, so that's pretty good. Going to that Decibel Metal and Beer Fest in Philly. That'll be fun. I always forget to mention this, but I have an Instagram, which is pretty easy to find. It's just Ground Zero Salem. Add me on there if you like. You know, I post records that I also talk about on here, so maybe that's pointless, who knows. Later, guys.